So I'm going to start with a little video first. So just bear with me here. I'm here at the entrance to the cave. I only have my little big cave light, so you really can't see anything that well. But my point here was not necessarily to take a picture of something that you could see that was of all that interest. What's interesting is that noise. Hear that noise? That's the wind that's screeching through the entrance of Lech Cave. I always thought that's pretty awesome. So the wind is kind of what started everything. So Lech Cave has been known for a very long time. It's just some random little cave that was guano mined at one time. But every once in a while it would blow up a lot of dust. And cavers got wind of it. And get to the next one here. Oops. Sorry about that. Here we go. Anyway, cavers got wind of it, hiked out there into the Chihuahuan Desert and checked out the entrance and discovered that it made a lot of noise, just as you heard, and that's even a bit subdued. And so over the course of probably 20 some years, there's been at least one other digging project besides the one from the Colorado Cavers. And that was one that was conducted by Cave Research Foundation. And they kind of dug on it a little while. It was a lot of work. It was still a great lead, but they had other things and other distractions. And so they pretty much gave up on the project. So Dave Allured, who is a Colorado caver, he was very much into digging, and he had some very great successes in Colorado. And he was talking to another fellow caver named John Patterson. And what John told him was that there was this great lead in the desert. And since Dave was a digger, this was just right up his alley. So they went, visited got a permit, of course, visited Lech Cave, heard the wind, and started planning how they can basically have a big dig project and see what they could do. And as you can see from the diagram, the dig is, well, it's right there. You can see it's basically filled with sediment and rock. And it really sounds, I mean, I was at the dig before it was dug open, and it sounded like there was a freight train under there. That's how significant it is, and it was. And so these guys had a lot of motivation. So they went to Lech Cave, they dug on it. I think they had 2 separate digging project trips. And on the second trip, they pretty much lucked out and broke through, and they got into Going Cave. And of course, because it was a dig site and it was a bit unstable, and you can see rocks and sediment there, before anybody could really do anything, they had to install a culvert. And so this is what the culvert looked like originally. That's not what it looks like anymore. And it did have an air lock on it, but basically all around it, it leaked like crazy. And so the sediment would dry up, it would collapse. It was not good on the culvert. And so, you know, a little bit of work had to be done before much in the way of exploration could happen. But what they did do is they did run down there and check out the cave. And what they found is that they had Going Cave. And of course, that's always great for any cave explorer to know that they had Going Cave. But I think at the time, nobody really thought about, like, well, what does that really mean? You know, your cave goes, you map it for a few miles, it ends. I don't know that if anybody really had an idea at the time what was the significance of this cave. So I just have some scenes here from the passage between the entrance and Boulder Falls. And if you don't know what Boulder Falls is, well, I'll have a picture of it in a minute. But it is one of the major, I guess you could say, first obstacles that you come to when you're in the cave. And there is Boulder Falls right there. It's a 147 or 146 foot deep pit. It's against the wall for maybe the first 30 or so feet, and then the rest of the way is a beautiful free fall. And the reason it's called Boulder Falls is because the very first descent of Boulder Falls, since no one had ever done it before, there were a lot of rocks and boulders and whatnot. It was a rock fall zone, and so that's why they named it Boulder Falls. As you can see on the right, there's Glacier Bay, and Glacier Bay is a big gypsum glacier. So it's not really a glacier, obviously, but it's a big gypsum deposit. And this picture is of Glacier Bay when it had handholds and footholds. Nowadays, the gypsum has been kind of worn down a little bit, and so there's not as many handholds and footholds. But the cave explorers, of course, this was all very exciting, and you know, gypsum coating, they were seeing hydromagnesite balloons, and they were seeing these big gypsum glaciers, and not as much, you know, not a whole lot in the way of standard speleothems, but this in and of itself, everybody was really excited about this. And of course, what we didn't realize was that this stuff was just like foreplay. Like, we had no idea what the real stuff was going to be like. And so on the first expedition, which was in 1986, they stopped at this big gash in the passage called the Rift. And so that was pretty much the end of the year, I guess, for exploration in 1986. But what I want to say in general is that this whole Lechuguilla Cave project, and you know, everything that's happened, has been a big learning experience for us as cavers as well. And there's a lot of lessons that we've learned, and some maybe that we haven't learned yet, and we're still in the process of learning. And one of them was working together as a project. And so when the big breakthrough was made, there were, you know, the leadership was a little bit unclear. There was a little bit of controversy and conflict. And so the National Park Service closed the cave for about 8 months so that the cavers can sort it out. So that was one of the first lessons, was that everybody had to work together. And so the 3 or the 4 main organizers, or actually there were 2 organizers initially, who were John Patterson and Dave Allured, and this was their project. Rick Bridges and Roy Glazer were participants in their project, but kind of sort of took the lead in a sense. And so there was conflict between, it was more of a philosophical conflict of how you map a cave, how you explore a cave. And so after about 8 months of a cooling off period, the National Park Service offered this as a project to those 4 individuals, and 3 of them took them up on it, and 1 of them did not. So that was lesson number 1 in working with the National Park Service. You have to work with them. And also, in order to be successful, you have to work with each other. And so at the end of 1986, this is what Lechuguilla Cave looked like. I think it was maybe 3,000 or 4,000 feet of passage. It ended at the Rift. There was an incredible wind that came out of the entrance, and even in the bigger parts of the cave, it was quite breezy. And so, you know, there was a fantastic potential. So in 1987, exploration started again, and that was in August of 1987. And at the time, the known cave went as far as the Rift. That was all that was known. But they organized kind of a larger expedition than normal. Initially, when the exploration work was first going on, exploration teams were limited to 8 people. That was the park rule. You could only have 8 people. After the first expedition, they allowed 12 people. And so for the very first expedition, you know, in 1987, they upped it to 20 because it looked like there was, you know, good potential for the cave. However, we didn't really have any going leads at that point. And so there was some major climbing done in the Rift, and they got into a bypass, an overpass, and this overpass led to the 3 main branches of the cave. And so that kind of started, that exploded everything. And so now we had objectives for 20 people. Now, one thing about this picture, these guys are all sitting at the EF junction. So in 1987, in August, all we knew was that there was a big overpass and that there looked like there were 3 leads at different parts of the junction, but they hadn't been descended yet. And nobody really knew what they were. On one of my first trips in there, I noticed, you see all that black stuff on the wall? Well, it was all over the wall and it was all over the floors, and it looked like bat guano, but it didn't smell like bat guano. So we couldn't really figure out what it was. We didn't know at the time. There hadn't been any science done at the time, so nobody really knew what that was. And so they started blaming it on this guy. I have no idea who this person is running around in a gorilla mask, but they were saying that it was gorilla guano, and you can see what we are really calling it. And so there was a lot of jokes about gorillas because, Lechigia, Lechiguilla, people didn't understand how to pronounce that who were not from the Southwest. And so, that's where all the Lechigorilla stuff kind of came from. So one of the major breakthroughs that we made in the cave was into the Western Branch. And this is a section of the Western Branch that you can see 3 gypsum stalactites there, and these are the 3 amigos. And I'm just going to kind of, I don't have a specific order of things. I thought about putting them all in exploration order, but I decided that I have some other things that I want to emphasize instead. So one of those things, besides working together and working with the national park, is also surveying. Now, we all, thought we were pretty experienced surveyors. We knew how to map caves. We've been mapping caves for years. But Lechigia kind of really threw us for a loop, literally and figuratively, because of the complexity of it. There are sections of Lechigia Cave that are these incredible mazes, and we didn't really know how to survey those at the time. And so that was quite a challenge because they're 3-dimensional mazes. And the way that we were surveying them, because they're 3-dimensional, they have quite a bit of vertical extent. The survey team would start up one side of the maze, go all the way to the top, work around in the middle, go all the way to the bottom, and you ended up with survey lines all over the maze, which is no big deal as long as you don't have to draw the map. And so drawing the map has been a very big challenge because of that reason. In addition to finding tons of cave passage, you could be guaranteed at any point in any trip at least at this time at Lechigia exploration, that every trip that you went in there, you were going to find some virgin passage, not just like random virgin passage, but like major stuff with significant things that we've never seen before. And this is an example of one of those things. These are underwater helictites. And these were first discovered in the Western Branch of the cave. And I think Donald Davis was one of the people that was on the discovery. I know there are other people that were also participated in that. I'm trying not to use too many names because there are a lot of people that were involved in this exploration, and I can't name everybody and everything. But these were significant. And as far as I know, and Donald will probably correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I don't know of any other cave in the world that has underwater helictites like this. Another branch of the cave that was explored and mapped was Apricot Pit. And this is the farthest reaches of the rift. And the 2 big leads in the middle of the rift and at the front of the rift are all, they're beautiful gypsum lined passage. Well, this stuff is lined with what we've learned was corrosion residue. And the Apricot Pit itself was not a straightforward open air or straight all the way down to the bottom pit. It was actually a pretty complicated set of ramps. And it took quite a while for us to figure out how to get to the bottom. But once at the bottom, there was certainly some rewards. This is in one of the rooms, not too very far from the bottom of Apricot Pit. And this is the Emperor. So we call this the Emperor of Lechigia because it kind of looks like an emperor. So at the end of 1987, at the end of that year of exploration, this is what the cave looked like. Let me And so there was quite a bit of progress made since 1986. We established that there were 3 branches of the cave. We knew that there was a significant western branch, and it certainly was more linearly extensive than the other branches, and not near as mazy, at least at that time. One of the other things of interest that happened during our exploration, of course, there was a lot of publicity about it, and some of the local people in town got wind of the fact that there's this major cave in Carlsbad, and if you could get tourists to stay one more day, then that would be great. And so what could we do to develop this cave to keep tourists around for an extra day or so? And they based this by looking at our line plots. And as you can see, the line plot looks kind of flat, but in reality, our cave is not all flat. And so anyway, that idea went to the wayside. And so we always show all these beautiful, great pictures of Lechia, all the fabulous formations and all the great things, but we don't really show a lot of people pictures. And maybe because the people pictures are not as attractive as the speleothem pictures. But when you put anywhere from 30 to 50 people up into the huts at Carlsbad Caverns, you kind of get some mass confusion. So people were sleeping on the floor, people were sleeping in the bunk rooms, people were sleeping in their cars, they were camping out. It was overall, I mean, in many ways, it was pretty chaotic. And the fact that we were able to organize survey teams out of this was pretty amazing. We also, had to do something about our data. Like, how do we deal with our survey data? We can't wait till we go home to determine all this, to plot it all out. So Gary Petrie wrote a program, and basically that's what we initially started using to reduce all of our data. And so after every survey trip, you came out of the cave, you sat down at the computer and you entered your data. And then people use that, to plan their trips. And here's kind of a quiet day. Normally there's a zillion people standing around here. And people sleeping, people awake, because our survey trips were like 24-hour survey trips. And the reason they were 24-hour survey trips was, well, it's an hour hike to get to the cave. Then it's multi-hours to get to your destination. Then of course you might have at the max 5 or 6 hours to survey, and then you have to come out. And of course repeat it all again. And so this ended up being that we had these incredible 24-hour trips. And if you ask me today, well, you're going to go on a 24-hour trip, I'm like, no way, I don't plan to go on 24-hour trips. But there was so much adrenaline because of the amazing exploration and the amazing things that people have been finding, that you couldn't go to sleep. So it was really easy to stay up for 24 hours. And about the only thing that ended your survey trip, of course, would be you had a sign out time. So you had to come out at a certain time. Either that, or you ran out of carbide, because at that time we were using carbide, or you ran out of food, or you ran out of survey paper. So then that kind of deflated you a little bit. You lost a little bit of your adrenaline. You had to take a little bit of a nap, and then boom, you're out of the cave. During this period, during the 50-mile mapping period, we were not camping in the cave. We were not allowed to camp in the cave. And so what we were able to do was we could take power naps. And so we took a lot of power naps. So in 1988 is when things really went big all over the place, but certainly in the southwestern branch of the cave. And that's the Easter Bunny there that's sitting next to me. I'm not the Easter Bunny. That white thing is the Easter Bunny. And of course, the discovery of the chandeliers, which have become kind of a trademark of the cave, which is pretty spectacular. And so finding all these, this is in, I think this is Ultra Primo. This is right off of where the chandeliers are, not too very far away from this. But another lesson that we had to learn was one about conservation. You're used to going wherever you wanted to go, stepping wherever you wanted to step, going any place that you wanted to go. And in this cave, you can't do that because any footprint that we put in there is there forever. So that's where we got very conscientious about our footwear, about clothing. You know, if your clothes are going to get, trashed, maybe you need to bring a change of clothes, and that is not uncommon, especially if you're going to be in the places where there's a lot of corrosion residue. And so conservation got to be, a really big thing. We flagged trails. We did what we can to try to not impact the cave. And I wish I could say that we were 100% successful, but I'll say that we weren't. We tried the best that we can. But anytime you just step in a cave, you impact the cave. I just have some random scenes of some of the spectacular stuff that we've seen in the cave. And of course, the exploration at Lechuguilla was pretty open in terms of anybody who had survey experience, and that included you held the end of the survey tape once. If you had vertical experience, survey experience, then that's all the qualifications that you needed to be able to come on an expedition. We had a limit to the number of people that could come, but that limit was pretty high. So there was an astounding number of people that participated in exploration. So, among the many great landscapes that we saw, we also started seeing, at one time people thought that nothing lived in Lechuguilla beyond Boulder Falls, or maybe even beyond the rip, because we didn't see anything. The only bats that we saw were bat skeletons. We didn't really see any crickets. We didn't see anything. And so the assumption was that nothing lived in the cave. And it wasn't until we started seeing speleothems, like you see those U-loops that you see on the left, that looked very organic, that there was any clue that there might be something more to this cave than just beautiful speleothems and tons of passage. And that will be a topic of discussion on someone else's talk, I'm pretty sure. So of course, I just have pictures of people surveying. Here's Peter Bosted surveying in some random crack somewhere in the cave. That's a shandamite on the right. We used to think that those were chandeliers that fell off of the ceiling, but we have determined that no, they formed right there. And so they're pretty spectacular. And I think that there aren't very many of those in other caves in the world. On the left-hand side, this is in the southwest branch of the cave, and you see that big orange thing. That's a sandstone dike that we have found kind of piercing a lot of the limestone in the cave. And just, this is not a camp, this is just a quick like bivvy power nap kind of thing. Because like I said, we weren't allowed to camp in the cave. We used a lot of rope. And one of the things that we had to learn was that we had to maintain our ropes. We had a couple of incidents, nothing, no one got injured or anything, but we had some severely compromised rope. And it kind of taught us that we needed to pay attention to what we were doing.
5 minutes.
Okay, this is Hudu Hall. I think this is Hudu Hall. One of the, I'm just going to run through these really quick. But just to give you an idea, there are a tremendous amount of spectacular places in this cave. That's why I said when we were all excited about hydromagnesite balloons, we didn't know anything yet. Gypsum abounds, and of course, gypsum gave a clue as to why Lechuguilla Cave formed in the first place. We had National Geographic came and did a photo shoot with Nick Nichols being the photographer, and in 1990, it was one of the feature stories in the cave. And of course, you notice the caver there is wearing some water shoes. And that's something that we learned, that everybody has to carry those with them on every trip, because you never know when you're going to encounter some spectacular flowstone speleothem area, like these areas in particular. So in 1990, and this was what, 5 years after the breakthrough, we had surveyed 50 miles of cave, which is a pretty astounding amount. We had 17 expeditions, and participating in those 17 expeditions were 317 people. So that's why we have 50 miles, because, well, we had a lot of people and we had a lot of trips. The cave by no means is finished. if you look at a current line plot, it just looks a lot fuzzier than this does. There's more upper level passages. The mazes are better defined and even more confusing looking. More, amazing both biologic and geologic phenomena continue to be found in the cave, and it is by no means caved out. It just takes a little more effort. Now there's no guarantee that you're going to come up with miles of borehole on every trip. You have to work a lot harder for it, but if you do, it's there. So I would like to thank photographers, because I'm not a photographer, I'm just a lowly cave mapper. Dave Bedell, Danielle Shalou, Norm Thompson, Peter Jones, Peter and Ann Botstead, and Roland Vineyard all contributed photos to this presentation, and I really appreciate it. Without the photographers, the exploration and the maps are important, but you have to have pictures as well. So, anybody have any questions, or what do we do? Do I get 5 minutes of questions?
You got 2 minutes for questions.
Well then, I guess I don't need any questions. I can answer some later if anybody has any specific questions.
Someone wanted to know who named the cave.
Who named the cave? You know what? I don't know who named the cave. We always knew it as Lechigia Cave, so I don't know. It used to be called Misery Hole. That's what the guano miners called it.
Wasn't
and
it?
It's
Wasn't
named
it?
Lechigia because.
Wasn't it on the map?
What?
Lechigia? Wasn't it on the map called Lechigia with the original quad?
It probably, and it's the entrance is surrounded by Lechigia plants, so that makes a sense on how they named it. Who named it? I don't know exactly.
Do you want to translate? Do you want to translate the Spanish?
Oh, little lettuce, like as in like lettuce, like like you eat lettuce.
Thanks. Okay, as PK turns off of her screen sharing, I want to apologize for not introducing her, but luckily her introduction was quite short. It is Pat Kambesis. I was a longtime Lech caver. Of course, she doesn't need much of an introduction anyway.